But now I want to draw your attention to a little shortcut that we did, though it's not quite right. Okay, so let me just summarize what we found so far. So far, we're saying, okay, given our growth expectations, that an increase of revenue of 8%, it seems like we're going to need for next year $493,000 in order to fund that growth for the company. Okay, and part of that is also because we want to pay in 10 days or less. Paying earlier means that we have more demand as far as funding that we need. Anyways, this is the 493. But there is one thing that may have bothered you in the, as part of my assumptions. Let me scroll up and show you what that is. Okay. When we're looking at the income statement, one of the things we said was the financing cost, it was kept constant. Now, what is the actual financing cost? Now, we know we're going to be able to borrow at 6%. That we know. But the amounts are not can't be the same. In fact, we know already that we're going to need more than $400,000 of fresh funds. So what is the funding cost, the interest expense that we expect to observe in 2018? This number can be right. It was placed initially to just simplify the process so we can get numbers and you can see populated cells. But this should be basically the interest expense, the 6%, multiplied times how much we expect to borrow between 2017 and 2018. And the issue, of course, is how much we expect to borrow. It's not an easy thing to just observe based on annual financial statements. Because if you start with, let's say, $100 of debt in 2017 and then end up with $1,000 of debt at the end of 2018, how much interest have you paid if you pay 6%? Is it 6% of the 100 or is it the 6% of the 1,000? I would argue that neither, right? You started with $100 of debt, and if you had kept that amount throughout the year, if that had not changed, then yes, your interest expense would have been 6% of 100. But it didn't. You went from 100 to $1,000 as of the end of 2018, in my example. So is it 6% of 1,000? That's not true either, because by the end of 2018, your balance sheet shows that you owe $1,000, but that does not mean that you have owed the $1,000 throughout the year. So as you can see, it's neither one or the other. So one reasonable way to find the financing cost, right, is just simply say, okay, let me just find the average debt balance that I've held between 2017 and 2018 and multiply that times my 6% cost of funding. And that's what I'm going to do here. Okay, so I'm going to take this number. I'm not longer going to use it. Not as simple as what we initially proposed. So let's do equal sign. And I'm going to use the function in Excel called the average function in Excel. So I'm going to start typing. Once you type in the equal sign, type A, V, like average. And notice that you'll see that the Excel suggests a series of functions that start with the same two letters. I'm going to select this one, and please double click. Okay, once you double click, I'm going to start choosing the numbers that I want to average. Okay, so what do I want to average? I want to average the total debt that I had in 2017 and the total debt that I have or expect to have in 2018. Okay, those are the averages that I wish to find. Okay, the average of total debt between 2017 and 2019. So how do we do that? Let's scroll down now. Okay, let's leave that as it is. Scroll down, and what is the debt that I have in 2017? What are the debt items? I can identify. Let's go to liability and equity section, right? And I can identify basically two, right? This one. And I'm going to add, right, plus, okay, the borrowings here. Okay, so the non-current liabilities and the current liabilities. Those will be the two. This, of course, is empty, so it's not doing much, but that's exactly what I'm going to do. Okay, if I had some number here, then it would be the average of the two. In this case, I only borrowed the short term, so the total is going to be exactly equal to 32,355. All right. And I want to find the average of this sum, and so I'm going to use a comma here. Okay, in some of your machines it could be that you have to use a semicolon, but usually it's a comma. And I'm going to find the sum of all of the debt that I expect to have in 2018, which again is just the sum of these two numbers. Okay, The difference is in 2018 because we know that we're going to need more money, and we know that we're going to borrow it all from longer term borrowing sources. We know that this is not going to be empty anymore. Okay, so we're just setting things up so we can estimate the financing cost. So I hope it's clear that we're just trying to find the average debt between 2017 and 2018, knowing that the only two sources of this financing cost are these two. All right, then I'm going to multiply this. This is my average debt times my cost of debt. What is my cost of debt? That would be equal to the 6%. And if you change this number, then everything else will be recalculated. All right, so this is what it looks like right now. This is the way the formula looks. Okay, press enter. And Excel doesn't like the fact that, of course, we don't have any value here. Okay, notice that it's empty, so let's put a 0 and a 0, right, just to make sure. And now it should behave, right? So let's scroll up, and the financing cost is 1941. And enlarging this a bit, let me just show you. This is the financing cost that we find. Obviously, we're missing, just so it can be considered as a cost, we have to make sure that to that calculation we just put a negative sign. So the financing cost is 1941, which is again interest expense multiplied times the average debt balance. So having that, you'll notice that the external funds needed are 493,838. Okay, now the 493,838 is presumably the amount that if you put here, put into the borrowings, right? That's the answer. The balance sheet would be at a balance. But let us remember once again that everything is really interconnected, right? If I plug in the 493 in here, let's just do an experiment for now. Okay, 493,838. Notice that even then, there is still an imbalance. Now, why is that the case? Let me just undo this. Okay, I just wanted to show you that necessarily does not solve the whole problem. There's an imbalance because if you change this number, what else does that change? Everything, all the cells are dynamically linked. So this amount will affect what? It will affect the financing cost that we just estimated, right? Because remember, this was the interest expense multiplied times the average debt balance. If we just change this cell, which is part of that calculation, it would change the financing cost. And if the financing cost changes, what else changes? That will affect your income. Now, though this income that is converted into retained earnings will therefore also affect the equity value at the end of 2019. Because remember, the equity value was the previous equity plus all the earnings that you retained. So that changes the equity. And if the equity is modified, then that will ultimately change the AFN, right? So it's really a dynamic process, and it's also a circular process. There's circularity. If you change a number, it will modify the rest of the cells and will eventually modify the external funds needed. So that in reality, you would have to do what? You would have to say, oh, 493,838. Now there's an additional imbalance of 14,815. So you have to add that to the 493 and keep on going until and iterate as many times as you need to until everything balances out. In other words, until you have an answer such that this number right here makes the AFN equal to 0. Now this circularity problem is not something that we want to fix manually. You prefer to just use an Excel tool that will do this in a few seconds for us. All right, so let me go back now. Let's put a 0 here as we were before. And remember, the external funds needed are 493,838. We know the circularity problem now, right? So let's use an Excel tool that is extremely useful. Let's go to data and what if analysis. And within that, there's something called Goal Seek. For you Mac users, you may have the what if analysis option directly in your ribbon without having to go through data. Okay. What if analysis, Goal Seek. And what you'll see is a box, right? Dialog box. And it says, which cell do you want to set? I want to make sure that when I have the right answer and everything is in balance, the AFN, which measures the imbalance between the total assets and the liability and equity in my forecast, that should be equal to 0. So what I'm going to say is set this cell, so click on the cell, okay, and you'll see that when I click, the cell's references come up with dollar signs. Don't put this manually, just click on it using your mouse or whatever you use to click on the specific location, cell location. Okay, it will automatically put all these dollar signs as well. You want this cell to reach a value of 0. So that you type in, just punch in the 0 using the keyboard by changing which cell, and that you choose this box, which is the answer. So what Excel is going to do is going to modify, it's going to explore different values for this cell until it reaches a point where the value that it's using is such that there are no more imbalances. Okay, so it repeats the process as many times as it takes until this is 0. When you have an answer such that everything that the external funds needed, the imbalance is 0, you found your answer. Okay, notice that it was very tempting to assume that a 493 was the answer, but if you let Excel do its iterations, you'll see that it's slightly higher than that. So this company, if it wants to grow at 8% and it wants to pay its payables in 10 days, it's going to have to find between now and the forecasted year $509,000 of additional funding. This is good to know ahead of time.